Yeah, they were on the ground from day one, but obviously, as I've expressed, I would have liked to have seen the intervention to bring back our streets to our people done much sooner.
Right, and so you've said that they were on the ground from day one, right?
That's right, they were the jurisdictional police service.
Right, and as the mayor of a town, you don't have or of a city, you don't have the security clearance or the clearance to know what the actual operational activities are of a police agency, correct?
Well, it's not a security clearance matter.
Welcome to Canvas.
It's a matter that
Please
there's
like, subscribe, and share our channel to expand our reach.
Organization called the Ottawa Police Services Board that has full jurisdiction over policy and governance of the police board and the hiring and firing of 4 key officers. That is their responsibility. The only direct link that the city has, as you may know from the Police Services Act, is that we approve or reject the budget of the police board.
Right, so I'm going to take you back, so I'll just be more narrow. So during the protests, you did not know what the operational activities were of the Ontario Provincial Police, correct?
I wouldn't know what their operational activities were, but they were coming under the jurisdiction and responsibility of the Ottawa Police Service. But again, I was never made aware of the operational plan, nor was I given the specific time that it was going to be launched, because it would be outside my jurisdiction. You could put 2 and 2 together and you started to see more police arrive. You knew it was happening imminently, but I didn't have the specific date, nor should I.
Right, and so you saw certain uniformed officers arrive, right, from the Ontario Provincial Police?
Well, I don't know if all of them were in their uniform. There were lots that were plainclothes, I suppose, but I saw a lot of OPP officers in Ottawa when we finally got to that 1,800 number, that's for sure.
You didn't know how many officers really the Ontario Provincial Police had here from January 26th until the invocation of the Emergencies Act, did you?
Well, our chief said that on average we had about 50 to 55 police officers from OPP at different stages on a daily basis.
All right.
But nowhere near the 1,500 that the Solicitor General referred to on one day.
And so just in summary, you had, with respect to their operational plans and what they were doing and everything that the police were up to, you did not know what they were doing, either the Ontario Provincial Police or the Ottawa Police Service, right? They didn't tell you because they couldn't.
Well, there's church and state. You know, there's a separation. The Police Services Board is autonomous under provincial legislation, and even the board itself, and I sat on the board for a number of years, but even the board itself does not have the ability to direct the chief on an operational matter. You know, so if they wanted to get together and say, you know, pass a motion, we want you to go and, take care of speeders on Carling Avenue for the next 2 months, that would be ruled out of order. It's not appropriate.
Right, so I just want to make it very clear, and I'd just like you to answer this question, if you don't mind. The Ontario Provincial Police and the Ottawa Police Service did not and could not update you on their actual operational plans, correct?
Not on the operational plans, but obviously we received information in terms of their discussions with other police services in terms of securing those resources in the nation's capital.
Now, you used to be the communication director for the Speaker of the House and Federal Parliament, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you then became a member of Provincial Parliament?
No, I became a member of City Council.
And then a member of Provincial Parliament after that?
No, then Mayor.
Then Mayor, and then a member of Provincial Parliament after that?
No, then President of the Canadian Tourism Commission.
Well, congratulations, but at some juncture, you became a member of Provincial Parliament, correct?
You got it now.
All right. Thank you very much. And when you became that member of Provincial Parliament, it was with the Liberal Party of Ontario at the time, is that correct?
Correct.
And you then became the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing from October 30th, 2007?
Yes.
And you held that office until January 12th, 2010?
Correct.
And the Minister of Municipal Affairs, that's the ministry that oversees the City of Ottawa and all of our municipalities under the Municipalities Act, right?
Well, the minister's responsible for the acts. I'm not the overseer of municipalities, but they are my, I suppose, client, if you could put it that way, that any municipal issue I was responsible for in Cabinet.
Right, but you're very familiar, of course, then, because you held that office with the Municipal Act, correct?
I am, yes.
Right, and you'd also be familiar with that as the mayor of a city.
Yes.
All right. And the current Minister of Municipal Affairs, and at the time of the protest, was Mr. Steve Clark, correct?
Correct.
And the City of Ottawa, like all municipalities across the country, it's a creature of statute that exists at the behest of the provincial legislature. Is that correct?
Yes, constitutionally.
Yes. And you agree that if Provincial Parliament of Ontario wanted to, they could set out how they want Ottawa to be governed and can basically do what they wish in that regard, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. And you can agree with me that the City of Ottawa is treated the same by the Government of Ontario as any other municipality in Ontario, aren't they?
It depends on the issue. There are some times where we feel that we're underserved in terms of provincial grants and contributions, and other times we feel we're treated fairly.
Okay. I've not seen in any of the many records in this proceedings that have been produced that at any time whatsoever that you contacted Minister Clark.
I don't know if I had a call with Steve or not. I certainly had discussions with his colleague, Minister MacLeod, on a number of occasions, and she was very helpful in relaying information. But really, the matter we were dealing with fell completely outside the jurisdiction of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. It was very much the Solicitor General who was the lead minister, and that was amplified by the fact that the Premier brought her on the calls.
Okay. So the issue that you were facing was a resource issue, was it not?
Resource of people, yes, police officers.
Right. And as the former Minister of Municipal Affairs, you know then that under Section 302 of the Municipal Act, that the minister may, upon such terms and conditions as it considers available or advisable, make grants and loans and provide other financial assistance to a municipality, right? You're aware of that?
Yes.
And at no time did you ever ask for any form of financial assistance from Minister Clark, did you?
No, I did with the Premier.
You did with the Premier?
Yeah.
Right, but you and I both know from your former workings as the actual minister that you go through the minister's office, right? You ask them for financial assistance, and they can give you a grant and give you money to deal with things like protests on an emergency basis, even if they want, right?
No, there has to be a program in place. You just don't go up to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and ask for a grant. We indicated to the Premier very clearly, as I did with the Prime Minister and his ministers, that we are counting on those two orders of government when this is all said and done and finished, that we would be keeping very close tabs of all of the extraordinary costs that we incurred in order to bring peace to our city. And both the Prime Minister and the Premier said that we'll be there for you to help financially. And we have since submitted all of our costs. It's in the tens of millions of dollars because, as you know, particularly when the municipal police services arrive, they have to be put up in hotels. They have to be given 3 meals a day. There's expenses, and we reimburse all of those municipalities. I, for instance, ran into the Mayor of Belleville a few weeks ago here in Ottawa, a few months ago rather, at the AMO conference, and he thanked us for the quick repayment of the invoice that they received. So the Premier was very specific and very generous, as was the Prime Minister, that they would be here to help us financially because the protesters were coming not to protest the corporation of the City of Ottawa. They're protesting mandates that were imposed by the provincial and federal government. We happen to be the as I said, the meat and the sandwich. We're caught in this middle fight between protesters and two other orders of government that are responsible for various mandates with respect to COVID-19. So, I wouldn't have gone to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing because most of his funding on an emergency basis is through the DRAP program, the Disaster Relief Program. This was not a disaster.
So it wasn't a disaster?
No, it was a crisis.
Okay.
And the disaster is a natural disaster. The bad storm we had a little while ago, the flooding in 2017, 2019, the tornado in 2018, that's where we seek support of the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and also through, again, the Solicitor General when we called the Army in to help with the sandbagging and the flooding in Ottawa.
Right. So the thing is this, can you agree with me as the former Minister of Municipal Affairs that having a program set out is not a requirement for the minister to give a city a grant? They can actually just do it under the Municipal Act, can they not?
Well, there has to be a program in place. There's not a slush fund that's kept by the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing that is there in case a bunch of truckers come and take over a city. There's no such program. You can't,
Well, I understand that, but what I'm saying to you is this, is that the minister, and when you were minister, you had the power to grant these grants even if there was no program. Is that not true?
No, that's not true.
Okay.
And secondly, I'm not sure why we would be going to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing for a grant. All we were asking for was the compensation to make us whole, to ensure that we received after the whole situation had been resolved, to make sure that we had the necessary receipts. And our treasurer is very good at this, along with the CFO of the Ottawa Police. All of the costs were incurred. I think the figure was, and I stand to be corrected, well over $36 million in costs. So that is being worked on now.
The City of Ottawa then had adequate financial funds to deal with the protest.
Yes, we did. We have healthy reserve funds.
So the only issue was actually getting bodies, right?
Well, getting bodies, yes, but also having the Emergencies Act so that we could get tow trucks and we could have a plan in place that once the police moved in, we could actually move those trucks that refused to move and tow them to a central location.
I just caught something you said. You said you wanted the Emergencies Act.
Yes.
You needed it to get the tow trucks.
Well, we needed something to get the tow trucks because we were not successful. So when the Emergencies Act was introduced, and it was made clear specifically one line that towing was one of the requirements that people could not say no to, that was a big win for us in the City of Ottawa.
And I take it, Mr. Mayor, that you have, of course, a relationship with probably numerous members of Parliament from your position as mayor in Ottawa, right?
Correct, yes.
Did anybody tell you before the Emergencies Act was invoked that it was coming?
No.
All right. So you didn't know if you were going to get these powers or what have you were going to be ordered with respect to towing vehicles?
No, when the act was introduced and my staff basically printed off a copy of the act and highlighted those sections that we could use. The one that caught my attention, the first, was the towing capacity to clean up the situation in Centertown and Byron Market.
So you do know, and you've already mentioned that, of course, the Ottawa Police Service Board is independent of the police service, the Ottawa Police Service, and they have no ability to order operational sort of orders or bylaws, right?
Yes, they don't pass bylaws, but...
And as the former Minister of Municipal Affairs, you also know that, of course, the province of Ontario and the Premier and the ministers at the provincial level, they have no ability to order the OPP to do anything with respect to resources either.
That's correct.
Right. So you know these two things, right? And you knew them at the time.
Yes.
Right. And it would have been the commissioner of the OPP that would be making those decisions, right?
Yes, he was in contact with Chief Slowly.
Right. And at no time, and that's Mr. Thomas Carrerick, is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. And you agree with me that at no time while you were looking for these resources, did you contact the commissioner of the OPP to outline what you wanted, right?
No, that would be inappropriate.
That would be inappropriate.
To contact an OPP officer.
He's the commissioner of the OPP. What's the difference? You're okay with having contact with the Prime Minister of the country, but you're not okay having contact with the commissioner of the OPP to ask him for what you need.
Because we have a system in place where we do not have politicians interacting directly with police officers or superintendents or commissioners. That would be highly inappropriate. That's why, as a politician, my counterpart is not the OPP commissioner, it's the Premier and the Minister responsible for the Solicitor General. So it would be highly inappropriate. During this whole period, I did not once speak to the Commissioner of the OPP or the Commissioner of the RCMP. Completely inappropriate. So, I dealt at the political level with members of Parliament, members of provincial Parliament, ministers, and the Premier and the Prime Minister. That was my role in this this period in our city's history.
Okay, and did you have phone calls with the Minister of Justice and the Premier with respect to what you needed?
Well, we had discussions with the Solicitor General and the Premier, and at the federal level, it was the Minister of Emergency Preparedness and Public Safety and the Prime Minister.
Right. And so, again, just in your statement that you provided, I didn't see when the dates were that you had these conversations with the Premier. When were they? What were the dates?
Well, I'll have to look them up. I don't recall what they are, but I believe it was in, it was 2 or 3 during the month of, I believe, February.
February. So,
I stand to be corrected, but I don't know the specific dates. The Prime Minister's office did provide a quasi-transcript, so we have the specifics on that. But these calls that I had with the Premier were, one of them was basically he called me on my cell phone. We had a long discussion about the situation that was on the ground. And then the other was when the Minister of the Solicitor General joined us and we had a discussion about the need for OPP officers.
okay. So, and I can tell you that the Prime Minister and the Premier were talking around that time too. And the Premier had told the Prime Minister, and I'm going to put it to you that he also told you, that he had no ability to order the OPP to provide you officers. It had to come from the Commissioner and the OPP themselves, right?
Right.
Right. And he told you that.
I don't know if he told me that, but the Solicitor General sent a letter, as we saw earlier today, indicating that she had sent our request, the letter that Councillor Deans and I sent to the Premier and the Solicitor General. She had sent that to the Commissioner of the OPP, which is the proper route, not telling him what to do, indicating that this request has come in and to please take the appropriate action.
Right. And the Premier told you that he wouldn't join the tripartite meetings because it was pointless.
He felt it was a waste of time.
Right. And it was.
How do you know that?
Because you were looking for officers and they couldn't order officers.
No, that's, I don't think you fully understand the situation, that I can't pick up the phone and start barking orders at a commissioner of any police service, whether it's the OPP or the RCMP. There's a protocol in place, and that protocol is to have a politician to politician. And the RCMP and the minister said the same thing. He can't direct Commissioner Leckie, but he can certainly pass along our request. And she made the decision, and we thank her and the commissioner because at the end of the day, they did provide the resources that ended up cleaning up this terrible situation our residents found themselves in.
Right. And this protocol that you've been talking about and mentioned, is it in writing?
Well, it's the law that politicians are not allowed to direct police services. It's very...
I understand that, but there's nothing that I know of, at least, and if you could point me to it, that says that you were prevented from either calling Commissioner Leckie or calling the Commissioner of the OPP and saying, hey, we need some more resources. Can you do this?
Again, I think that would be entirely inappropriate, you know, to give the powers of operational responsibilities to politicians is a very
I'm not saying that,
slippery
sir.
slope.
I'm asking you if there's an actual policy that says you are not allowed to call and make a request to the police. Is there a policy in that regard?
Well, our city solicitor advised that the route that we should be taking is the letter to the Premier and the Prime Minister and the two appropriate
Okay, so it wasn't a
ministers.
protocol. It was what the city solicitor told you to do.
Well, I'm assuming that he would have told me what to do based on the law of the land. And,
Okay.
the policy is very,
I'll ask
very
him
clear.
about that when he testifies.
Sure.
The other questions I have for you have to do with the mediator. Now, you had asked the
Sorry,
federal-
with what?
The mediator. You had asked the federal government if they could appoint an independent mediator, is that right?
Yes,
And the federal government said no.
that's correct.
Right. And they said no because they didn't want to look like they were engaging with the protesters. Is that right?
You'd have to ask them. I can't speculate why, although, as you know, there was a movement on the same day by two colleagues on council to bring a resolution to council to ask the federal government to allow a mediator to try to find a middle ground. That motion never made its way onto the council agenda, so the
Right.
council didn't take a position.
You said that you had no issues with financial resources at the time. So why didn't you just hire a mediator?
Well, again, the issue that the protesters were in Ottawa was not to protest the city of Ottawa, but federal and provincial mask mandates, among other issues that the truckers were upset with. So it was not really up to the city to start that kind of a broad-based mediation. What we did do, and what we were somewhat successful, was to secure an agreement by Ms. Leach and those truckers who fell under her jurisdiction, for lack of a better term. And I believe that was successful. We were able to get 40 big rigs and about 60 smaller ones out of the residential area and onto Wellington Street. So that was not mediation. That was an individual, Mr. French, who came forward and offered at no charge the ability to see if there was some common ground between our police service and the protesters. But in terms of why the federal government didn't want to deal with a mediator, you'd have to ask them.
So Mr. French steps forward. He says, I can help. And he finds some common ground and was going back and forth, of course, between the city and the protesters.
Yes.
So he mediated the issue.
Well, he was a facilitator because he ended up getting a letter from me and then a subsequent response from Ms. Leach. And the activities took place, I think, the next day, and then they were halted once the Emergencies Act was implemented, I believe, on the 14th.
Right. And after that agreement was done, the protesters followed the agreement and tried to get onto Wellington, and the only thing that ended up stopping them was the police. Is that correct?
No, the police were there actually to help facilitate and traffic manage the congestion to bring them on to Wellington Street and away from the residential areas. So a senior officer was assigned, and my understanding was that it worked quite well, and then the Emergencies Act basically put a halt to that because all resources for police were needed to clear the area the following days.
I put it to you that after the Emergencies Act was invoked, and you may have heard some of this evidence yesterday, that there was just a change, and that it was the city who decided not to follow through with the agreement with the protesters, and that was what happened with respect to that agreement.
No, I believe that we did our best to live up to the agreement, and as did the truckers who did move, and we appreciate that. Because that was the first time, as you know, where there'd been any kind of movement on the ground. There was a level of frustration. There was more and more rowdyism that was taking place in the streets of Ottawa. And we felt, as my number one preoccupation was to protect those residents who had been putting up with horn honking 24 hours a day, diesel fumes that were coming into their apartments and condominiums, and general unruliness where people were afraid to leave their homes.
Right. And so you would agree then these statements that have been out by various people that the protesters did not live up to the agreement are incorrect. In fact, they did.
So I'm not sure who you're referring to.
There's been numerous. It's okay. But you agree that the protesters lived up to their end of the bargain, right?
On that particular issue, yes.
Right. And you had earlier said in your evidence that, you couldn't negotiate with these people rationally, but you did have that done in the end, didn't you?
No, I didn't get involved in it because I did not believe that I should be personally involved, but Mr. French acted as a go-between between the city OPS and the group under Ms. Leach. And, we're appreciative of Mr. French. He had really no skin in the game. He was not being paid for this. There was no business angle. I think he saw what was happening, and
Right.
it was his capital as well.
And sorry, I don't
he
mean to
took
interrupt,
action.
but I just want to get my question answered. So they said, you said earlier you couldn't negotiate with them rationally, and you had no dealings with any negotiations with them except for the issue with Mr. French, right?
I had one or two calls with Mr. French, and then it was handed over to Mr. Kanalakis and Mr. Arpath.
Right. And so prior to that time, you had no attempt or nothing of involvement with respect to attempting to negotiate with the protesters, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So your statement earlier that you could not negotiate with these people rationally, you agree that the one time that you actually had any involvement whatsoever, you did, right? You had a rational negotiation that resulted in an agreement, correct?
No, I didn't, because I wasn't involved until the final agreement
I
came
understand.
forward.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next up is Mr. Slowly, his counsel.
Afternoon, Mayor Watson.
Afternoon.
Commissioner, may I just, before I begin, note or ask you what your preference is about the lunch break? Should we, I have, I believe, 25 minutes. Could we rise at 1 o'clock? Would that be?
We certainly can. We can take 10 minutes,
10 minutes
now and 15 minutes after lunch.
Very good. Thank you.
We'll break you up into two parts.
Thank you very much. Mayor Watson, a couple of things, if I can,
Sure.
please, this afternoon. You told the commissioner that throughout this experience, Chief Slowly had your confidence,
That's correct.
and that was right up until the time he resigned.
That's correct.
Chief Slowly, to your observation, you obviously were speaking with him during this time on a daily basis.
Almost daily. Yes.
Almost daily. During the time that you worked with him and observed him, do you agree that he performed his duties in good faith?
He did. Obviously, I was not involved behind the scenes, but certainly in any dealings he had with me or senior city staff, we came away confident and impressed, number one. And secondly, I thought he was a very good communicator. He was reluctant to have daily press conferences, which was a bit of a bone of contention, but when he did, I thought he handled himself with distinction.
Thank you. And I was going to say, you obviously were not with him during the entirety of these operations, but in your observation of him with your colleagues, whether they be political members of council or political staff or city staff, he was always professional.
He was. I think if I could just elaborate on that, I think he found the nonstop flow of questions and complaints and so on stressful, as we all did. And I think at times he probably was frustrated himself with the volume of work that was coming in and legitimate questions by members of council, because as you know, the members of council were representing the voices of those people, particularly in Somerset Ward and Rideau Vanier, that were under tremendous stress. And that stress percolated its way up to everyone within the organization, including the chief. But I certainly, I never saw him be disrespectful to any member of council. I think he was firm from time to time with a few members of council that what you're proposing, Mr. or Mrs. Councillor, is illegal, but I never saw him lose his cool.
Right. Thank you. And finally, like you, and like probably every other person involved in this on the city side, just confining ourselves to that for the moment, he worked around the clock.
Yes, I think that's the same case for his command team, right. And a lot of our staff and so on. As I said, on what I saw of him, I had his confidence, or I was confident in him. I don't know what was going on behind the scenes in terms of the operations. I'd heard through Mr. Kanalakis there was a level of division within the various police forces. Having never been involved in a protest or an occupation of this magnitude, I would not have any knowledge to compare that kind of give and take that we heard was taking place behind the scenes. But certainly it was my expectation that he would continue to see the operation through and clean out Wellington and Rideau Center and Overbrook Forbes.
Understood. Now, just a couple of things then. You observed that what occurred here in Ottawa last January and February was unprecedented, first of all.
Yes.
And also something that had probably not been witnessed for 2 generations.
Well, you know, as I mentioned earlier to the Commissioner and to Commissioner Council, that, you know, I've been in public life as a political representative for 25 years, and nothing comes close to this. Now, I think, obviously, COVID, because it affected so many people in Ottawa, over 800 people died, that was a bigger challenge. But in a condensed period of time, in a condensed section of the city, nothing compares to what we went through. And I think the vast majority of people who saw what was going on empathized with our citizens, but there were those who thought it was no big deal, and that was what was frustrating, I think, for myself and the frontline officers and the chief.
Right. Including, as you've described to the Commissioner, your effort to try to engage the other levels of government, the province, the federal government, was the source of some frustration for you on the basis that they did not come to the aid of the city and its residents in what you would have thought was a timely fashion.
I wanted it to move faster. I suspect the federal government will say, well, you don't have your plan ready yet, so why are you asking for resources? But we knew, regardless of what the plan was, there was going to be a need for a significant number of new police officers coming in, particularly public order police officers, those that basically deal with crowd control. So regardless of the fact that we didn't have all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted on the plan, we need it, and we knew there was going to be lag time by the time you make the decision and the time they get on a plane and arrive in Ottawa and get geared up. It was going to take some time. So yes, you know, the frustration I have and where I think there was a failure point was I wish all orders of government had worked faster to get the plan ready and to get the officers on the ground, and we could have resolved this hopefully by the end of week 1 instead of week 3.
Very difficult, I think this is, tell me if you agree, very difficult to finalize a plan, an operational plan, until you know what resources you have. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not a police expert, so I can't give you an informed decision. Certainly on the surface of it, we knew that we were going to need hundreds and hundreds of police officers because we were outnumbered 100 to 1 or 200 to 1. You just have to see the video of the raves and the dance parties and the honking of the horns and all of the other activities that were taking place that really stole neighborhoods away from the people who live in them.
Right. What, perhaps more precisely, what I was getting at is that if the RCMP or the OPP in the aggregate had told the city through the proper channels, right, that instead of 1,800 or 1,900 additional personnel, the only personnel available was 1,000 in the aggregate.
Right.
What I understand, you were, in listening to your OPS colleagues and Steve Kay and others, was that the finalization of a plan would require some knowledge of what that number is. If you're sending 1,000 people, the plan is different than if you're sending 1,900. You agree?
On the surface, I think that makes eminent sense, yes.
Now, Commissioner, may I suggest then, I think I've got just about 1 o'clock. Can we rise here and
Yep, we'll rise until 2 o'clock.
Thank you, Mayor.
Great, thank you.
The commission is in recess until 2. La commission levée jusqu'à 14 heures.